Kevin, welcome to my channel. I'm very happy to be the first to introduce you to the Greek internet community. I know that the facts that you're going to be presenting might come as a shocker to many people, as we are going to touch on a subject that most Greeks would find difficult to grasp uh, because it's beyond their reality. But truths have to be told, and consciousness should be expanded beyond the proverbial box. So without any further ado, please introduce yourself to my audience, giving us an outline on your life's work and struggle for the past 20 years at least.
Well, for the last 20 years, I've been fighting very hard to expose the genocide in Canada against Native people and the trafficking in children, not only in Canada but around the world.
Yeah,
And
excuse
we
me,
built
just
really
sit.
a big movement that forced the Canadian government to address the issue and even issue an apology for some of the crimes in the Indian boarding schools that we exposed. I suffered many things in the course of that. I lost my family and my job. I was thrown out of the church. I was a minister in the United Church and was fired and blacklisted, so I couldn't get work. But we kept bringing out the evidence that over 60,000 little children in Canada died in these Indian schools that were run by the Catholic, the Anglican, and the United Church, and over a century. And that none of these children who were killed, they've never been brought home for a proper burial. The people who killed them have never been put on trial. The government and the churches have excused themselves of the crime, and these crimes are ongoing. Native families continue to disappear. They continue to be forced off their land by big corporations. And so we are in a continuing battle to expose and to stop these crimes.
Yeah, do you mind sitting back a little bit because I want to see your whole face.
Oh, I'm
Okay,
sorry.
yeah, just
I thought I thought we were in an audio interview, and so I wanted to get close to the microphone,
no,
but I forget it's on video,
no,
so I'm sorry about
we
that.
can hear you perfectly. Don't worry about the microphone.
Okay.
So when were you ordained minister? In which denomination, and when were you asked to leave the church, and why?
I was ordained in 1990 in the United Church, and I was finally expelled in 1997. I had been working in Port Alberni, which is a town on the west coast of Canada, and when I got there, the congregation, there were only 10 people in the church who came on Sundays, and after a few months, I raised that to 100 people. We filled up the church. It was filled to the day I was fired, and I let Native people speak from my pulpit. I allowed them to speak about anything they wanted, including what had happened to them in the Indian schools. And as a result of that, we learned that the United Church, like all the other churches, had been taking land they had stolen from the natives and then selling it to corporations.
Wow.
For a lot of money, and none of that money had ever gone to the natives. So I thought that was wrong. It actually, doing that was in violation of our policy. And so I wrote a letter to the church about it, and I was very quickly fired, prevented from working again, and they even went to my wife at the time and helped her divorce me. And I lost custody of both my young daughters. So it was clear the church was doing everything possible to stop me because I was beginning to expose the fact that children were being killed systematically in these Indian residential schools. Nobody had talked about those killings before I began to document it.
Why doesn't all that surprise me? After leaving the church, have you done a deeper soul searching regarding your faith? And how is your faith standing now?
Well, I had to when your whole life is destroyed by an institution.
Exactly.
It's not exactly like the church has anything to do with the teachings of Christ. They wouldn't have locked up and destroyed the lives of those children and killed them if they had. Nor would they be hiding behind lawyers now and refusing to accept responsibility. I mean, they're very destructive institutions. And I already knew before I was fired some of the history of the genocide. But I didn't know the detail until Native people began sharing it with me. And my own faith has got a fairly profound change. I still hold to the teachings of Christ, but not at all to organized religion. And I recognize now that these crimes are very old. They didn't just happen in the last century. They go back thousands of years. And a lot of it is coming out of Rome and that whole, that whole genocidal tradition there.
Yep. Was it England or Ireland that marked you as persona non grata? And please tell us about the findings of the 800 babies in Ireland, as this thing with the satanic cult, as you already mentioned, extends all over the world and is not something that happened only in Canada, right?
Well, that's right. As I mentioned, it goes back many centuries. And as I extended this campaign in Canada and we forced the government to issue an apology in the year 2008, that same year I got invitations to come to Ireland and England and other countries in Europe where these crimes had gone on as well. And we formed in the year 2010, we formed what's called the International Tribunal into Crimes of Church and State, the ITCCS.org. And many of these people in Europe had suffered the same kinds of crimes at the hands of the Roman Catholic Church, various other governments and that. And we began to show how the child trafficking and crimes against people today involve very high up people in the British monarchy, in the Catholic Church and other churches. And once I began to document that in England, I was actually deported from the country in May 2011. And
why doesn't that surprise me either?
Well, it's interesting because the reason that happened was that same spring in 2011, I had been invited by a group of Mohawk Indians in Eastern Canada to come to the former residential school that had been run by the Church of England. It was called the Mohawk Institute, and we found a mass grave site next to that school. We unearthed the remains of children, bones, and buttons off school uniforms. And right at the same time that we were doing that, that's when I went to England to do more research into where this came from, and that's when they deported me. So obviously they were concerned about that coming out.
I've heard you talk about the Ninth Circle and how their satanic rituals take place in various hideouts like the Caernarfon Castle in Wales, as well as the basement below the Roman Catholic Cathedral Marie Reine du Monde in Canada.
Yes, well, part of the work I began to do in Europe, I was approached by several people who were survivors of satanic ritual torture and killings. Now, these are families that are satanic networks. They bring children, they raise children in the network and either sacrifice them or raise them as members of their cult. And two of the survivors of these cults came to me, and their testimonies are up online at itccs.org. There are two Dutch women, Toos Nijenhuis and Anne-Marie van Blienberg, and both of them describe being taken to castles in Europe, all over France and Germany and England, Caernarfon Castle in Wales, like you mentioned. They saw Prince Philip, top people like George Soros, who was Hillary Clinton's financial backer, and other prominent politicians at these ritual events. Now, these are events where children were raped, tortured, and then killed, often their throats cut, and then they were the members of the cult drank their blood and ate their body. It was like a parody of the Catholic Mass. And these also were involving human hunting parties where they would take teenagers who they had got out of youth detention centers in Belgium and the Netherlands and hunt them. They would release them naked in the forest outside Brussels and then hunt them with guns and shoot them and then cut off their sex organs as trophies.
My God.
These events were described as recently as 2013 going on. And these are eyewitnesses. These are people who were at the events, and they're living in hiding now. So a lot of the work we do now is to document these stories and create common law court cases where the evidence can be put out there so that other courts can really actually one day issue arrest warrants against these high officials, because these crimes are continuing as we speak.
I remember that you saying 2 years back that a conclave of the Ninth Circle was programmed to take place on August 15th, 2014. Just to make a quick note here, August the 15th is Mother Mary's Day in the Greek Orthodox calendar, and a great holiday for the Greeks, the biggest one after Christmas and Easter. Was any action taken to stop that murderous spree of the Ninth Circle?
Yes, we found out that there was going to be a ritual killing in the main Catholic cathedral in Montreal, Canada. It's called Marie Reine de Mont,
Yeah.
Mary Queen of the World Cathedral. That's right in downtown Montreal. And so we contacted a group that was connected to our tribunal in Europe, and they sent over a team. These are ex-military, professionally trained men, and they went in and stopped the event. It was to be held in a wealthy home in the suburb of Montreal. They stopped it from happening. They notified the police, and they released 2 children who were about to be sacrificed. Now, the Montreal police were involved with these cults, and so no action was ever taken. But we did show that citizens can take action to stop these events. And in fact, in Europe, our network has shared with Interpol information so that 2 years ago, Interpol actually made raids and arrested over 1,000 people.
That's good.
And they released 30 children who were being held in cages, like animals, in Brussels. And that's because of the evidence we gave them. So it's very important to be working with honest police and those who are, going to be willing to act on this information.
Sure. That's one good point for you there. Jay Parker, who grew up in a multi-generation Illuminati family of Satanists, claims that at least 10% of the population in the US are Satanists engaging in ritual human sacrifice, and that in the US alone, at least 30 million children have been and are being subjected to satanic ritual abuse. He feels certain that it is more or less the same percentage that extends to Europe as well. What is your estimate on this? And while you're at it, I'd like you to talk about the satanic rituals in Europe, so, like the ones you spoke before. Okay, you covered this hunting thing, this hunting spree that you said before, but there was this. I'd like you to comment on the satanic ritual show at the opening of the Gotthard tunnel in Switzerland, the satanic connotations on CERN, or any other rituals you're aware of.
Well, the reality is that these crimes are widespread. They're not just done by strange people in robes on certain days of the year. Child trafficking, child torture, and killing is an industry. For example, in English, it's called a snuff film. Snuff is to kill somebody.
Yes.
A snuff film is where you torture and kill people on film and then sell it for a lot of money. And they operate in any part of the world where there are a lot of refugees, where there's been wars, natural disasters like a tornado or a cyclone. Children disappear quite often, and whole families. And so it isn't just the satanic ritual, but it's a whole very lucrative business to trade in human beings. It's estimated that there's over 25 million people being trafficked as we speak. That's slaves. So the human slave trade never stopped. And we know a lot of banks are behind this, like JP Morgan, HSBC Bank. A lot of the big banks launder money for the drug traffickers, and the drug traffickers also are involved in human trafficking. Like the 'Ndrangheta, they're called 'Ndrangheta in Europe, it's the mafia. Yeah. And they actually provide the children and the teenagers for these human hunting parties and other ritual killings. So it's like dealing with the mafia. It's a huge organization. It has a lot of police and politicians on their payroll, which is often how these things remain hidden.
I don't know if you've heard about James Casbolt or Michael Prince. I've heard him talk to Miles Johnston. This guy was horribly abused as a child under the MK Ultra program, grew up to be trained as a super soldier, according to his claims anyway, and is now in prison under a silly pretext. perhaps because he was getting too annoying, if not dangerous, with his revelations about some factions. Just like Max Spears was, whose death was suspicious to say the least, and is now going, this story is going viral as the mainstream media focused on this. I have two questions for you here. First, has your life been seriously threatened because of your work, which exposes many in the higher echelons, even the Pope and the Queen of England? And second, what is your view on Caspol's claim that these Luciferians, okay, just answer the first one first.
Okay. Well, I've had everything happen to me except being physically killed. I've had my entire life destroyed. I'm under constant harassment. There have been attempts on my life. I've been physically attacked. I sometimes, depending where I am, I live under protective custody because of threats being made. Now, of course, when somebody like me is very prominent, the strategy is not to kill them because then it draws more attention to me. If I was killed, people would start thinking, oh, well, maybe it was right, everything he was saying. Instead, what they do is they kill my reputation. They do character assassination. They get people to think I'm lying and making it up.
Yeah, we'll talk about that later, yes.
Yeah. So that's really, the level at which it operates. But when I get too close and when the so-called mainstream media start reporting my stuff, then the attacks happen. One thing that's never happened is nobody's ever sued me, which is showing that we're not, that we're telling the truth, because if we weren't telling the truth, they'd have us in court with evidence proving that we're wrong. So, I mean, that's one of the things to indicate that, like when we charged the Queen and Pope Benedict and that with these crimes, they never disputed the charges. And under law, that means you're agreeing with the charges.
I think somehow you've got some other kind of protection apart from protective custody you get once in a while. The second question is, what is your view on Caspol's claims that these Luciferians sacrifice children not only to get on Lucifer's good graces, but also because some of them, if not all, need the blood and the pure energy of children to rejuvenate, get stronger, and even survive? What's your take on that?
I think that's very possible. I don't have any first-hand evidence that goes on. I do know that people who do these satanic killings believe that's the case. They do believe that they need the blood of the innocent to survive, even grow younger. But of course, if you're a Roman Catholic, you believe that the wafer, communion wafer, and the wine is literally transformed into Jesus' body and blood. So there's a fine line between that and satanic rituals. And I think, in fact, that's one of the reasons that satanic cults flourish within the Roman Catholic Church, like the Ninth Circle, because they're really saying the same thing, that the innocent have to be sacrificed to bring life to others. So,
well, talking about the Roman Catholics, on April 27th, 2 years back in 2014, a Catholic ceremony at the Vatican took place in St. Peter's Square. The ceremony was held to induct 2 former popes into sainthood, and there was another announcement made in that ceremony. Pope Francis and the Vatican has introduced the world to the God they've been worshipping all along, Lucifer. According to Pope Francis and the Catholic Church, Lucifer is the creator of the world and the father of Christ. He brought light, he said, to the human race, and during that ceremony, the priest called on Lucifer. They are getting more and more blatant by the day, aren't they?
They are. The mask has slipped, and they have no qualms anymore about just saying all of that. Like, for example, one of the churches where these sacrifices go on is right just several blocks from the Vatican. It's called San Lorenzo Church. It's the head Jesuit church in Rome. And we know that every February 23rd and 24th, there's a series of child sacrificial killings there in a sub-basement area beneath the sanctuary of the church. So this is a long tradition in Rome. It goes back to Roman times where children were routinely sacrificed. It's never stopped. And the thing to realize is that it has a lot of protection. And the protection of people not willing to believe that these things go on.
Yep, that's one of the basic reasons they keep on doing it. Now, I'd like you to explain what the ITCC is, as well as how many trials took place, more or less, and what were the verdicts.
Well, as I mentioned, in 2010, we formed the ITCCS, the International Tribunal into Crimes of Church and State. And 2 years later, it convened a common law court. And that means that citizens had the right to convene this court. It's sometimes called a tribunal of conscience under international law, where citizens can bring to trial a case when the courts are not doing it. When the police and the government are complicit with these crimes, the citizens can take legal action. And 2 cases were heard, the first one being concerning genocide in Canada. And there were 30 defendants, including Pope Benedict, the Queen of England, the Prime Minister of Canada. And we gave them the opportunity to respond to the charges that they were engaged in concealing genocide and actually being involved in the murder of children. And they never responded. The court case went on 3.5 months, and the citizen jurors eventually found all of the defendants guilty of crimes against humanity. Now, what was interesting is that verdict came out in February 2013. 2 weeks before the verdict came out, Pope Benedict resigned, the first pope to ever do that in peacetime. And we found out that the Spanish government had issued a note to the Vatican saying that based on the evidence they had seen in our court case, they would consider issuing an arrest warrant against Joseph Ratzinger, Pope Benedict, if he ever came onto Spanish territory. So they knew that our verdict from our common law court had weight, that other governments could issue arrest warrants based on our verdict. And so that was historical news.
Yes.
And since then, the present Pope Francis, who's also guilty of these crimes, has been doing his utmost to make it seem like the church has changed. It's a big public relations operation, but he himself trafficked children for the military junta in Argentina when he was bishop there. He's been involved in these 9 circle rituals and everything. We have that from eyewitnesses.
I got to know about you and your work from Alfred Labramont Weber. Then you had a falling out of sorts and he removed all the videos with you. What happened? Why would Alfred, who seems to be committed to fighting the same factions you are going up against, suddenly turn against you?
I never know why people do these things. I didn't have a falling out with him. We were on very good terms. In fact, we did an interview the week before that happened. And all of a sudden, he started denouncing me in a very strange way. He was criticizing me for not releasing the names of the judges in that court case, in our common law court case.
Yeah.
Even though in our last interview, he had agreed that it wasn't a good thing to release the names of judges because they could then be killed or influenced. And so in any normal court case, you don't disclose vital evidence is protecting the jury or the prosecution of the judge. So all of a sudden he flips around and something or someone influenced him. That's all I can say. I can't imagine who. I do know that he was, in the times that I knew him, he was very nervous a lot of the time. He admitted his uncle was a Jesuit and that he had been a member of Skull and Bones at Yale University. Now, whether or not that had anything to do with what he did, I can only speculate. But
it's weird because he's also spoken openly about the fact that he was abused as a child. And I would have thought, that he'd be behind you all the way. Anyway, this is...
Same thing. It's the same thing with Native people. Those who are abused can be very easily manipulated. And they're programmed, to do that. And so it isn't the first time this has happened. But it was timed. The other thing is it was timed just before we were coming out with a very important announcement in Canada. And so clearly it was done strategically to cut down, our listenership, our audience, at a very key moment. But, you know, I say to people, I don't care what names people call me. Let's look at the evidence. And he, like all the other people, smeared me. They never address the evidence. They just attack me. So it's kind of childish, frankly.
Well, it's really sad and disappointing, to say the least. We ought to stand together for this fight against the darkness. But what can we do? We win some, we lose some. I have a feeling that these uncalled for attacks didn't make you lose sight of your focus to what's important here. And if I'm right, I commend you for that, because the dark and evil criminals must be our targets here, and not fighting between us. Don't you agree?
Well, yes, because when we fight between ourselves, children die. All the attention we put on that, on attacking each other, takes away from the ones we really need to be exposing and attacking, is the criminals that are trafficking and killing these children and torturing them to death. And that's got to be our bottom line. And if people can't cooperate in exposing that, then I have questions about their integrity.
Well, one thing's for sure, Kevin. Satanism and its criminal practices are spreading more and more, and I'm truly thankful there are people like yourself dedicating their lives to fighting this scourge. I hope even more people follow your lead. I, for one, am trying my best from my end. It was an honor to have you on my channel, and I thank you for accepting my invitation. I pray that the Lord gives you strength to carry on and bring more victories, as you are setting an example for anyone who considers themselves human. Please keep in touch and let me have your news when you have some.
I will. Thank you.
Our discussion was great, and thank you very much.
Okay, we'll talk soon.
Be strong. God bless.
And you.
Bye.